Welcome to season 2, episode number 12, and we are doing 3 webcasts today. This is kind of a special format for our webcasts, Futureproofing Now. We are in the midst of identifying the best products and brands and organizations and categories within 16 different categories. We're going to cover off 4 on this webcast today. We have 2 illustrious panelists to join us. My name is Sean Moffitt. I'm glad to be your host. I'm also joined by my co-host, Andrea Kates. Hello, Andrea.
Hey, Sean. Nice to see you.
There we are. Kind of more spruced up than our post-pandemic selves, I suppose, but you're looking pretty good today. I'm my haircut is a little bit lacking. We enter out of stage 1, I think stage 2 this coming week, so I expect gladly to get a haircut. This is really fun for 2 or 3 different reasons. One, I just love to identify companies that are doing great things out there in the world. I actually stole a quote from one of our common colleagues, Dave Marvitt, particularly in a pandemic and particularly given all the disruption that we've all faced. It's extraordinarily hard to take a long view in the midst of a crisis. And I think we're in the midst of, in this conversation today, identifying a whole bunch of companies that have done great things either from a brand standpoint, from a product standpoint, from a channel or a growth standpoint. Any kind of top line thoughts as we enter in and wade into who we thought were at the top of our list, Andrea?
From my perspective, the crisis is a great time to actually take a backwards view and see who was getting ready to do the right thing before the crisis hit and how their behavior changed. So I'm all about seeing how companies respond. And as you know, that's what we're all about at Futureproofing Next is responsiveness. And also, we love hybrids. And so I think that this is a day where we can reflect on people who stepped outside of their swim lane to do something remarkable because the swim lane has been closed.
Well, I'm excited to get my own nominations in. I know our 2 expert panelists are too. I'll just mention 2 things in passing before we introduce them. We have, so nominations start next week. So essentially how this will work is we are kind of like the entertainment act before getting kind of masses of people to nominate who they thought were great in their own worlds. Because I think one of my blind spots is as much as I think I know the world, you run across that great Danish company that you've never heard of, but people rave about it. You hear about that thing in cybersecurity that, although I know cybersecurity, I don't know who the best players are. And so we're going to open this up to people over a 6-week period. We'll have a group of judges look at those. And by the end of the summer, we'll actually be able to identify with some level of certainty who the best players are across these different companies. We do have 16 different categories. So today, in this conversation, we're covering off brands, products, channels, and growth. But we admit there's other areas of future-proofing, customer experience and engagement, technology and platforms, business models, talent, transformation. And then we have some stuff at the top in terms of the overall and the 3 Ps. We've got kind of an overall winner. One purpose didn't really fit into a category, so we just kept it as a general category. A personal brand winner, and I think if I'm not mistaken, Taylor may be actually exposing maybe a personal brand nomination today too. And then a pandemic winner too. I thought unique to 2020, hopefully unique to 2020, we'd award a pandemic, kind of who came out of this looking the best from a future standpoint. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Andrea, and hopefully you can introduce our panelists.
Yeah, well, it's always great to have panelists who are dynamic and opinionated and global. And both of these people fit all of those categories, and also people that we've worked with. So it's really part of the extended future-proofing community around the world. So Bob Walton has a great thing we always love to say is how many people can say that one day Steve Jobs called me and said, could you come and look at what's going on at Pixar from a technology perspective since you're sitting at Next Computer? So that's a story that I love to tell about Bob. We met when he was in another industry. He's got background in computers, defense, aerospace, electronics, utility, energy, and healthcare, and really excited because he has such a wide range of experience. Bob, welcome, and in just a minute you can tell me what I left off. And then Taylor Ryan we met him when we were doing a Copenhagen Business School. We were trying to be very diplomatic around a lot of very interesting startups that were doing, one of the pitch days. And it was really wonderful to see kind of a yin and yang of perspective. I would say that Taylor is known through Clint Marketing as one of the top growth hacking firms based in Copenhagen, but very global perspective. And so once again, he can correct that or add to that when he does a second introduction of himself. So welcome to both Bob and Taylor. Game on.
This will be fun. I'm looking forward to this. Hopefully there'll be some new ones. I know we had tasked both of you with the idea of, okay, let's surface some people that a lot of our audience might know, but also let's surface some people that they might not know either. So I think sometimes these lists end up being popularity contests versus truly kind of an appreciation for somebody that's done something well. We are trying to award people that have seen the future and have gone there, you know, quicker than most, earlier than most. And so here's how we'll probably run this. We'll go category by category: brands first, products, then channels, then growth. I'm going to leave some time at the end for Taylor, who's actually done some additional homework on this one and actually built a presentation that outlines probably a number of them. So we'll probably get a grocery cart load of kind of nominations before we get started. So, and as well, I guess myself and Andrea will wade in almost like panelists. We hate being hosts all the time, so we'll offer up our own nominees as well. So with no further ado, let's start. Brands, it's 2020. Who do we love? Why don't we go to Bob first? What's your thought, Bob, here?
Yeah, I think, you know, with regards to brand, one of the ones that I'm enthused about is Samsung. And not so much from a consumer product standpoint. I mean, it's ubiquitous, obviously. It's a well-known global brand. But they're getting into some pretty interesting areas, partnering with smaller companies, enabling, for example, small startups that have interesting software applications to meld those applications with their tablets. And so one of the examples I have is Samsung, and this is both a brand and a product example, I guess, so maybe I'll get credit for both. Samsung is partnering with a company called Accendo Wave. Now, Accendo Wave is a machine learning software in the pain management field. And so it's basically a combination of Accendo Wave software, an EEG or EKG monitoring device, headband, and then the Samsung Galaxy Tab through some customized Samsung software runs as an integrated system. And the good news is 83% of the people using it apparently see pain relief. So it's the #1 opioid alternative in the marketplace for pain and discomfort management. And they're also building the largest pain measurement and discomfort measurement database in the world, which will help train AI systems. So I think it's got immediate help for patients, obviously, in distress, and has a great future for defining how we might move forward and apply artificial intelligence to large data sets around managing something as ubiquitous as pain.
I love it from the standpoint it's a brand that I knew, but it's something that I didn't know about them. So you've got to start it on the wrong trail, on the right trail about this one, Bob. So there's our first nominee of 2020 here, Andrea. Let's move to Taylor. Taylor, what was your if there was one on your list, is there a brand that kind of shines more than others?
Yeah, I actually chose an old school brand. Well, old school to me, Nokia. So Nokia's been around forever. Everybody remembers kind of that old brick phone. But I see a lot of really interesting traction over the last couple of months. They fired their old CEO. They brought in a radical outsider, which to me is indicative of companies that are trying to do something that is unique. Now, Nokia had a little bit of slippage more recently with trying to roll out some 5G technology. The world has been pushing back on that with not only COVID-19, but also conspiracy theories, which makes for a whole interesting conversation. More recently, they laid off 1,000 employees over in France, but I think it's one of those things that you have to keep an eye on. A lot of people are using COVID-19 as an excuse to shed dead weight. And often what you'll see within a lot of the job markets within countries that have super strong unions is that there's more massive layoffs because they have a reason to actually shove these people aside. Now it sucks and it's terrible to see, but honestly, there's probably a bit more of a methodical approach there saying, look, we're gonna end up losing our hat if we continue to employ these really excessive salaries and crazy vacations and all that other stuff. Additionally, they've been awarded some pretty lucrative contracts recently. So you're looking at Verizon tapping Ericsson and Nokia for DSS trials, which is basically sharing the broad spectrum within telecom, which is super exciting. So my money goes to, yeah, the new kind of kid on the block, radical outsider, Pekka Lundmark, the new CEO of Nokia, and I think they're going to do some pretty interesting things.
Wow, Nokia is back on a list again. Little did I think we'd ever see this day again. They used to be rubber boots, then they went into tech, and now they're doing kind of good B2B, kind of the plumbing of the internet. So great.
Don't forget, they were a paper company in like the late 1800s, so like they've had a history.
No, they keep coming back from the canvas, so I love it. I love the European perspective too, so thank you on that. Andrea, just thoughts on a brand that has hooked your fancy this year?
Well, this one should be no surprise, but it was to me, JetBlue. I have been on airplanes, as we all know, like 26 to 30 weeks out of the year minimum every single year. And this year that would be pretty much zero. You know, there was one Q1 trip. And I keep thinking about who I'm going to trust, because I didn't used to think at all about safety or trust or sanitation or viruses when I got onto airplanes. But the one thing that keeps me from, you know, all these fabulous ideas of, you know, fly to Portugal, we'll pay you to come, is, you know, COVID. So they came out, and of course we always see footage, and I won't name the airline, but of too many people squashed together in the row, which is everyone's greatest fear. And, you know, that one person without the mask that's going to be, of course, sitting next to you, because that's the Murphy's Law of flying. So, you know, JetBlue has come through with this promise that they're going to keep the middle seat empty. And I know that there's a lot of reconfiguration of airplanes to turn seats around, et cetera. But, you know, if you say something for PR versus you do something that actually helps people on a consistent basis, got my vote. So I view as a brand JetBlue, and hoping, fingers crossed, that they're going to stick with their promise.
All right, I will complete the brand mix. I did it a little bit differently, but we get to the same place. My perennial all-time favorite on this list is Patagonia. I don't know why their clothes might be better than Columbia's, but I just buy them all the time. And I think part of it is their purpose-driven mission. I know when Greta Thunberg came out last year, and it was kind of like she was everywhere, they kind of started to rally some of their teenage kind of customers to actually do things around some of the property things that were going on in the US. So they have my vote. They have a ton of other things going on. Just look at their website. It reads more like a magazine than it does a brand website. The two lesser knowns here, perhaps everybody knows kind of the episode. Ryan Reynolds is part of a company called Aviation Gin. And I don't know if you remember, Peloton last year had an ad with a woman who was somewhat, let's put it back in the 1970s chauvinist era of, oh my Lord, she has to be on a Peloton to actually, you know, impress her husband. And so Ryan Reynolds very sharply, and I'm not too sure if it was him or his company, but his gin company took that same actress, put her in an ad for Aviation Gin a week later, and actually kind of borrowed the, I guess the Twitter stream that was interested in her, and actually made it more impressively for his own company, Aviation Gin. And there's just another company called Tent Style. No one's probably heard of them on this webcast. They are a hammock company, and I think they just understand the Instagram era. Like even their website, all of their stuff is vertically focused, because they know their entire business is driven, and their entire brand is driven by looking at hammocks in very impressive locations around the world and then selling those online. So those are my three.
I have a question though, Sean. This is not a challenge. It's a question. So if Rose Marcario from Patagonia, who's just stepped down, is that a good or a bad sign? Because I know that Taylor was saying get rid of the dead wood. I know that's not what she was. But what do you think in terms of the future? Will that company stay on the awards for next year, Mr. Futureproofer?
Well, no, I've read up on her in a number of magazines. Patagonia's been great for like 30 years, so I'm not too sure who's replacing her, but there seems to be, and I've even talked to people at her company for my first book, and there just seems to be a feeling there, like we know how we operate. We don't need a shingle on a wall, and we don't need a CEO to tell us. And so I have some confidence that the journey will continue with whatever new CEO comes in.
Okay, I'll take that as a bet.
Okay.
We'll check on
You
it
know
next
what?
year.
We have about 10 outstanding bets on these webcasts. So I'm going to move to products now. So a little bit out of the realm of perception and more kind of like, all right, what product delivers, a benefit that, has seen the future and is building it now. We'll maybe start with Taylor on this one. Just any product out there that rings true to you this year? Oh, I think you may be on mute.
Proof. Now you can hear me. Cool. Yeah, I wanted to share my screen real quick to make it a little easier, but there's two products that I'm kind of, I'm straddling between. These are internal products that have come out of larger organizations that have had super big challenges with logistics. The first is Twill, which is from Maersk. And basically it's all about shipping and trying to shave off anything that you can in terms of the whole supply chain management, ERP solutions, but deliverability of what honestly is, of course, products that everybody uses and needs on a daily basis. So what they did was basically build out something to use internally, and they're like, wow, this turnkey solution is actually pretty good. Why don't we sell this to other people? So Twill is definitely on my list. And the other is Ware2Go, W-A-R-E-T-G or T2GO. It's a UPS product, and it's trying to do what not only Costco has done successfully, but also Best Buy, trying to help people create basically a back of house that then becomes a shipping center. So more or less giving people the advantage of not only local shipping, but being able to become their own fulfillment center in-house, which to me is kind of this hybrid between innovating, but also doing things in more of an old school fashion. I think you're going to see a lot of that because people are starting to see worse and worse deals coming out of working with like Amazon fulfillment centers. So if they were able to do that themselves, they wouldn't be losing such large margins in market share to obviously the biggest players like Amazon. So I definitely see logistics in both kind of the product area from both Twill and Ware2Go is like, yeah, just a no-brainer for me.
Well, then the other interesting thing too, Taylor, is they're both kind of edge organizations within bigger companies, which I always love to see. Like we don't believe corporate innovation is something that goes to awakes at a hackathon and then goes to sleep the other 364 days of the year. So I'm glad to see two big companies getting in the game of kind of a hungry startup mentality. That was great. Bob, what's your products on your list?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to Andrea's out of your swim lane hybrid notion and also play a little bit off the COVID crisis. I don't know if you saw in Wired Magazine a couple weeks ago an article about Tom Wolfe, formerly of UCLA, who was kind of a biological data monger and started up a company called Metabiota several years after being originally interviewed by the article writer. It turns out in 2015, they actually started putting together a prepared pandemic kind of underwriting capability, starting to work with Munich Re, which is a big reinsurance provider, and also with March, which is a big broker. Sorry, March is a big U.S. broker to sell it in the U.S. And so they saw, and if you looked at the marketing brochure, they referred to this, it literally panned out exactly as they predicted with specific losses in major industries. And what they did was actually create a policy, a pandemic policy, which you hear about, but nobody bought. It's called Pathogen RX. Well, actually one company, one small healthcare company that remained unnamed, apparently did buy it according to what I read about. So, it's kind of the best product that nobody ever bought because it probably could have avoided some of the major impacts that we've seen if enough people had bought it, if it had been underwritten properly, if it were sold ubiquitously, at least in the US through a brokerage there. And again, it's kind of got the European element with Munich Re built in there. Swiss Re was mentioned, but I don't think they were part of the consortium. But this Pathogen RX, nobody's going to sell it to you now. But it was a missed opportunity that might have avoided a lot of economic headache had this kind of biological epidemiology data-driven company and this insurance company and sales company come together in this odd hybrid just a couple of years too early, I guess, to get the kind of uptake they needed to be successful.
It does make me think, Bob, is there a new and you're mining in an interesting area. Is there a new insurance product out there that people will buy now that they know that the nearly improbable impossible has happened? Like, is there a future gray swan that will raise its head and kind of have to insure against it? Not too sure.
Well, it's an interesting thought, John, because the article concludes asking Tom Wolfe whether or not he thinks things are looking up or down, and he actually has a relatively negative perspective in that he said, look, the things that are happening now between global warming and basically breaking down the biological habitats and restricting biodiversity and a number of other factors are converging to turn these 100-year events into maybe 50-year events. So in his mind, he thinks the good news is COVID may have broken through the risk aversion of spending for something you don't see the value of. But the bad news is if you don't develop the product you just mentioned, if we can't start developing and buying risk-adjusted products, we may see more and even worse sort of pandemics come down the line that could be just as or more devastating. So I think there's now an imperative, I hope, for companies to collaborate across the data space and the insurance space and maybe come up with ways to protect society and the economy as a whole against what's inevitable. Statistically, it's just we don't know how frequently it's going to be like a meteor strike. You won't have to insure against the mega one because we'll all be gone. But if there's some intermediary level disasters, it'd be great to know you could at least rest assured you're not going to see your business destroyed by something that happens halfway around the world.
I am jumping on right after this podcast or webcast and looking for zombie insurance. That's my next best bet in terms of future.
Zombie apocalypse. There you go.
Andrea, who do you have on your product list?
Products. Well, I actually picked something that is also COVID related. I picked Clorox. And the reason I picked it is that it's obvious and not obvious. And they've done a few PR moves. I don't know all the depths of this, but there is a Cleveland Clinic, United Airlines, Clorox cooperation that's been announced. I haven't experienced it, but it looks like it's doing the right thing. What impressed me is from a product perspective, though, is you couldn't get the wipes. And so you would imagine that there would be either hoarding or price gouging. And to their credit, Clorox did not raise prices. They figured out their supply chain in a really cool way. They did not hype or put themselves on the front burner in terms of, look at us, we're being amazing. They very solidly and steadily did the right thing on a consistent basis without a lot of fanfare, probably saved a bunch of lives, made people feel the peace of mind that they'd all been looking for, and continued to do this really interesting, low-key, it's like the company you never thought to really appreciate because it doesn't get all the glamour and glitz, but they are consistently, the fact that they did the right thing without getting any credit for it. They could have gouged so easily, but instead they said, you know what, we're Clorox, you need us, and we're gonna make sure that you stay in supply. And also, they're not going back to work themselves in their own companies. They put the frontline workers that have to make the product as their first priority, made sure safety happened there. And then everybody else can just wait their turn and figure out the virtual work environment. So it's the company that I think deserves a lot of credit that doesn't ask for it, that deserves it. And that's why I picked Clorox.
My hope is it's emblematic of how companies maybe have turned the corner post-COVID in terms of just having a soul, right? I think, I've generally, we've done some research on this. People have given companies a passing grade. Generally, there's been some offenders, but generally they've actually performed with, give credit where credit is due. I think they've done a pretty good job handling their employees, their communities, and not doing the things that obviously Clorox didn't do. So my three products, I went down the similar road of CPG. I can't escape my Procter & Gamble roots. So I went with Hershey's. It's weird. I've never liked Hershey's chocolate. I will go on record that Cadbury's and a whole bunch of other chocolates are more to my taste. But if I look at their innovation agenda for the last 2 years, it's exploded. And one of the interesting things is they found new uses for existing products, whether it's through new packaging or, make your own type of stuff. Hershey's has kind of recognized that we are no longer in the era of please go to shelf, please buy my box of whatever and not play or mash it up or pimp it up or whatever you want to do with it. So I give them credit. And certainly there was one recent example where they did joint sponsorship with DC Comics. And so they had a superhero chocolate bar that you could give any kind of first responder or emergency person during the COVID crisis, which I thought was like a really good, poignant way to actually get a product that might seem fairly commoditized with an emotional bent to it. The other two I had, the less well-known, although increasingly more well-known for maybe somebody like Bob in the States, is White Claw. Apparently the seltzer market in the States has exploded. I don't know what's happened here, but I think there's been, and quite frankly, the dominant share player there is this company called White Claw. And I guess they've traded on men who don't like beer or men who don't want some of the sins that you come along with beer. And certainly that's kind of been the drink takeoff of the year. And the last one I thought was a really good e-commerce player. It was called Style Saint. I'm not into women's fashion necessarily, but I ran across their website. And everybody talks about being great for the environment and great for different types of diversity and inclusion purposes. They actually, if you scroll over any place on their website and you try to buy a product, you can scroll over a point score for the product that you're actually purchasing. And it has a point score dedicated to ecology and diversity. And so I thought it was a really good to marry both cause and ecology. So those are my three. Let's go to channels. We're like halfway through our roster here. This is going out better than we thought, I think, Andrea. We invent these new concepts and we go, I wonder how this will play well. And I think partly because we've got two good guest panelists today surfacing new people here. Channels. Which companies have actually kind of either created a new channel unto themselves or participated in a channel in a creatively different way and maybe seen the future before others? And maybe we'll start with Bob this time first.
Thanks, Sean. This one probably wins on branded product too, but I'm going to go with SpaceX. I think the relationship that they've been able to develop with NASA and the preeminent role they've taken in bringing us back to space after such a long hiatus with the space shuttle and the preparation for the moon and Mars and whatever comes next really positions them as a real future-proofing company, and one that's not only from a product and a brand standpoint, but like you say, from a channel standpoint, how they've gone to market, how they've been able to work effectively side by side and embrace NASA, and frankly be embraced by NASA, which is saying a lot for a government agency to work with a private sector firm on a mostly voluntary basis. I'm guessing. They probably don't like to be shown up, but they certainly can respect what's coming to the fore, and they've been very cordial, at least in terms of how they come to market and show up. So I'm going to give them the nod for channel, and I'd probably give them maybe a brand and a product nod as well, just to make sure they get a trifecta.
Do you think we're in an era again where, you had this explosion of interest in space in the 60s, which actually produced a number of interesting innovation that dipped into the 70s and 80s? Do you think SpaceX might be kind of the canary in the coal mine here that may produce kind of a wave of space-related innovation?
I hope so. It's a little hard to tell from here because space is so expensive, right? There's a very deep moat and the barriers to entry are very high. So I think there's going to be lots of players, but whether they're going to play such an amazing role like SpaceX, or whether they're going to be supporting players, subsystems, platforms, launch technologies, new bits and pieces, taking the Merlin engines and Falcon 9 to the next level, whatever that may be. I think there's going to be lots of that. And who knows about quote unquote Space Force, right? And what's going to happen with that and whether that's really a long-term area for investment. So I think we're definitely entering a new 60s space era. I was stimulated as a kid by the Apollo missions and the Jetsons and all the other cool stuff that we're foretold is going to be next year. We all thought we'd end up at Alpha Centauri, and based on Star Trek within about a 10-year period. But hopefully now this thing is going to get some real weight behind it. We're going to see some momentum. Certainly they're doing some amazing things. And gosh, I hope this is really a kind of a completely new breakout, multi-decade kind of, growth spurt for them.
Wonderful. Great example. Hopefully more Star Trek than Black Mirror in the future. Taylor, what was on your list of channel innovators?
Yeah, I took channels a little more literally in terms of like actual channels where people are publishing. So I said TikTok, and a lot of people think TikTok is just for kids. That platform is evolving so fast, it's crazy. So 35% of TikTok users have participated in a hashtag challenge, which basically means you're getting people to create content around just a hashtag, an idea. And that means they're participating in whatever that value is. Maybe it's put on by the brand in a subversive way in order to get people to think about their products or using their products. But like the numbers behind it are just absurd. So there's 30 million monthly active users in the US. The daily average per user, it's 46 minutes, which is like, I mean, that I don't spend that much time on any app that I guess I'm aware of, but like I personally have been putting out content and I'm seeing exponential growth. So just this last week, this is the statistics for this last week. I had 122,000 views. And bear in mind that these are just 1-minute videos, but they start to add up. And you're not seeing the same rate of stuff getting buried on this platform that it's so consistent with Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Stuff's sticking around for a while, which is kind of interesting. So beyond that, I have a little over just 2,000 followers and 27.3 thousand likes. So like, and it's not from doing that much work. So I imagine you'll see kind of this budding scene of really interesting influencers that are just kind of coming out of the woodwork, and larger brands that are desperate to kind of win over this younger generation by trying to invest in any way possible. They've launched their marketplace, so it's essentially the Wild West at this point in terms of compensating people that are interested in producing content. I think it's going to be an incredibly valuable channel for learning and kind of micro learning. I'm using it on a regular basis. It trains itself. So if you're watching videos of silly things, you get silly things. If you use it like me in order to follow growth hackers and get some really interesting insights, not only on corporate innovation was one of the series that I did, but there's just so much good stuff in there that people are undervaluing, and it's not an overdone platform at this point. So you're still getting in early if you start making content today. So I'm all about TikTok in terms of a platform that you can get real penetration, real traction, and actually reach a huge audience in a very short period of time. So TikTok.
They've almost created their own channel unto themselves, haven't they? Like there's I think Facebook used to be really good at this until advertising kind of got its greasy mitts over their platforms. They are, somebody on the inside has told me they understand attention perfectly. They are like the attention channel that, they know which dopamine hit really gets the users to actually engage deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole that is TikTok, right?
I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. Andrea, what was on your channel list?
So mine is one that's interesting when I think about channel, because I think about channel as a way to do organic growth, and when you're not necessarily the technology, but you're getting people, there's uptake. So I actually picked Blue Cross Blue Shield of California. It's a sleepy brand that you might never have heard of. It's once again not a razzle dazzle brand, but there's been, first of all, there's a consortium of a lot of different groups around the country that are a loose confederation. So you don't have to have any uptake in content. It's not as if, the central corporate office says, thou shalt use this program. And so to me, there was a program, but I keep watching what they're doing, called Wellvolution, which is not an easy name to pronounce, but it was something that was created as an end-to-end wellness kind of holistic digital experience, therapeutic digital experience. And you're thinking, okay, everybody does that. But somehow 10 million people, which compared with TikTok numbers is not a lot, but 10 million members engaged with this, developed. Everybody's trying to crack the code and sort of, how to get members to actually, I don't know, I've been at this for 15 years, Bob, the prevention, maybe even longer, trying to get people to be, to switch to a different channel, and it's not that easy. This is actually something that, once again, slow and steady, and the secret behind it, I believe, and I don't know this person, but the person in charge of their innovation is very well trained in design thinking and empathy. And I think that based on what we read about, there's a real sense of the unmet need as the driver. It's not a product pushing out or a pricing model, But the channel, what I love about it is there's organic uptake from a set of, I would call them products, that function as a channel where the channel members themselves have the choice of take or don't take, and they take. And it feels as if it grows organically, which means that there's more traction to it. So from the outside, and if, you know, it'd be great if I actually heard from the people running this, if they have another opinion. From the outside, it looks like something that a lot of us can aspire to do, which is to just do the right thing, try to develop something, grow organically, keep the customer engagement on a steady basis, and have it not be a subscription that you dread, but a participation that you value. And I think the difference is huge, and feels like that's a really important thing for a lot of corporations to learn how to do. So that's mine, Blue Cross Blue Shield of California.
I love the fact, I mean, large can be beautiful, right? Like it doesn't always have to come in a startup box. So that's a good one. I like that one. I had two on my list. One, which might be more familiar to Taylor, just being closer to it. I tried to get my European representation on this webcast. So I have not had a personal experience, but from everything I've heard, seen, complimented about, there's a grocery chain in the UK called Morrisons that has got extraordinarily good plaudits in terms of its treatment of its customers during this pandemic. They've kind of completely pivoted to be an online business. Of course, they have some of the pick and pack type of parcel and pickup or whatever the people want to call it. But I think as well, they identified an audience as well that something like 6 to 7% of people, the British population, can't get to a grocery store. And so they've completely created a new channel for telesales and making sure that there was some distribution system that actually got out to those people as well. So I thought that was really, really neat. They've got a lot of good karma coming out of it, but as well, I just think it was smart from that. If we're all moving online, how do you satisfy this disenfranchised population that can't physically get to a grocery store? The other one, and this is my Canadianness leaking out here, I always try to kind of at least support the home country here. The fastest growing company in Canada 2 years ago and still remains a quick grower today is a furniture company out of Vancouver called Article. And so they're vertically integrated. They produce the stuff, they sell the stuff. They don't have any retail locations. It's a completely online business. And from their own kind of opinion, they've curated whatever their customers want from a super curated set of influencers and kind of understanding of what kind of an upscale person that's living in Vancouver and probably parts of North America want in a North American chain. So it's just an interesting way to, you know, if you're willing to buy a $5,000 piece of furniture and not willing to actually, or not able to actually sit on it or lie in it or whatever you do on their furniture, it's an interesting way of curating kind of something that, you know, with certain levels of confidence their consumers might want. All right.
I have a correction. Yes. So noted. So it's officially Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, but the winner is called Blue Shield of California. Thank you, Bob.
For the record, let it be known, we have fact checkers here. This is like Jeopardy, where there's those 10 people with dictionaries going, nope, she was right after all. All right, we're looking for the high growth companies here. People that have meteoric rises based on having probably identified something ahead of somebody else. Taylor, it's over to you. Who have you got on your list?
Yeah, I couldn't decide between, well, a lot of companies, and so I went with stuff that was more scale up as opposed to early stage startup. If I'm talking about maybe something a bit more early, I could go in so many different directions. So I think this is a really interesting play because it's order of magnitudes later in terms of how these things are going to affect and hit the market. So I totally understand why Twill or Twill, I don't know how they pronounce it. It's that corporate card that allows you to basically get benefits, and also you're able to kind of charge up lunches on the spot. The idea of working from home sounds really good until you do it for 6 months. And I think we've all been there. You know, like the first thing to go is language. So like I'm not able to articulate myself very well if I go weeks without speaking to people on a regular basis. The next that goes obviously is just I don't care how I dress. And I think we've all kind of been in this situation. So what you'll see, especially with younger generations, I definitely see this out of millennials and even the early folks in Generation Z getting back into the job market, is they want benefits to go to work. They want to go to work to be around colleagues, to be in the culture. And working from home, again, sounds really cool on the outside. But when you actually do it for a long period of time, it's like, I don't have any friends here. I don't have any human interaction, and all I'm doing is working. These guys see what's coming, because in 2 years, everybody's going to realize, man, this whole idea of like everybody remote works, not only can we not like, we can't really micromanage people, but also people are less happy because you've given them this. So I think that's a huge play. I also think in the immediate, you'll see a big uptick in Canva, because when you start pressing the budget to tighter and tighter areas, some of the nice to haves are the things that go first. I think really talented design gets often shelved or put off to the side. So they'll tell marketers to pick up some off the shelf product like Canva, and you don't need to be a Photoshop or Illustrator whiz in order to do this. I think you'll definitely see an uptick in the short term with people picking Canva as opposed to a talented designer to help with everything under the sun in terms of landing page design, emails, and all the other crazy things that Canva's kind of evolved into. But those are my 2 picks. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love the, I mean, I think you're on the leading edge of a trend here, like the work from home kind of life hacks / technology hacks, I think is going to explode, right? I think we're seeing, you know what, at least in Canada here, and I think in the US, we've kind of been 4 months in pandemic, and I think you have the mental health, the networking, the just beyond like where is your physical workplace probably will manifest itself, if not already, very soon. Those are great ones. Bob, growth, what do you have on your list?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I've got a kind of a tie, or maybe it's a horse race, and it's 2 related technologies and 2 different stage companies. So the earlier stage company that's got faster growth is Oculus. Of course, they do the VR headset. A lot of people know about it. I think virtual reality is not quite here yet in terms of being ubiquitous, not only because of price points, but there are still some technological and frankly some user experience things that have to be overcome. But they're making significant headway. And I think the Oculus Quest in particular is really moving the ball forward. You hear a lot about the Rift, but the Quest is really, I think, the product to watch. And I think virtual reality has a lot more to show us as we go forward. At the same time, a larger company, Microsoft, is doing HoloLens 2, which is augmented reality, although I've heard that now called mixed reality or extended reality. So there's, I guess, different terminology. I'm not sure where it's going to end. I think it started with augmented reality. Maybe we'll go, to one of the other ones. But I was looking at one particular application with a software company called Metabiota. So HoloLens 2 is really more of a B2B product, especially at the price point. I think it's $3,500 for the base system. And then you have to put software and basically use it in certain applications. Metabiota is pretty cool because it's actually an FDA-cleared surgical holographic assistant. And so you can kind of imagine, right, this future of a well-trained surgeon getting holographic anatomical assistance from an AI-driven software coming through an augmented, reality set of glasses or headset, and providing for greater patient safety, greater outcomes, possibly lower costs, certainly lower complications, one would hope. It's almost like having a surgical team with you, but in the mind of one individual, so you don't have, death by, 1,000 cuts or, too many cooks in the kitchen. So I'm really kind of enthused about that, and that's just one of the applications. They have another one that's COVID-related called Spatial, which Andrea and I talked about just briefly before, well, I alluded to briefly, I'm now talking about it, in our little prep for this session. Spatial is basically taking Zoom with you everywhere you go. And so it's allowing you to meet in a room with someone sitting across from you in a completely virtual way as if you were there, and having an interaction that is obviously an order of magnitude more interpersonal and immersive than what we're doing here on Zoom. And I think they're probably early stage, it would be my impression in terms of how well that works. But as that sort of technology continues to take on, and certainly given the push for remote work, you're going to find that there's, I think, a pretty good uptake. for augmented reality. So I think augmented reality, just to sum it up, probably more practical and has some really interesting uses from a B2B and even a B2C standpoint eventually. At the same time, virtual reality, really super cool, very immersive, has its own application and use case. They complement each other. I don't think they compete head to head, but they are different, and a lot of people sometimes get them mixed up. So those are my two votes, Microsoft and Oculus. And again, kind of a growth story, but except for Oculus, probably not a huge growth curve yet.
Yeah, that would be interesting. We may never leave our houses again between pandemic and AR. Like we may just be happy in our room. So both a good and bad thing there. Good one, Bob. Andrea, what do you think?
So mine is actually Lego, and it's for a couple of reasons. One is they experienced 6% growth when the overall market experienced 3%. You wouldn't necessarily go, whoa, incredible growth, 6%. However, once again, I was just really impressed from afar. I wasn't living in Denmark at the time, but I read something that they did during COVID that seemed remarkable to me. They paid their vendors, their small vendors, first. They did not do the whole corporate, we're not going to pay you, and it's really tough times, and good luck, small vendors. So they put their money literally where their vendors' mouths were. And I felt like, if you grow on the backs of goodwill and on the backs of developing good relationships that'll be there when the good times come, that feels to me sustainable. And to that point, they've also, there's a book that was written about them called Brick by Brick a few years back, and it was showing that they were really kind of losing their way. The toy business was, they were pretty rocky, and they were losing sales, and I think it was like 2017, it was tough times, and so they had to reinvent and sort of become a phoenix that rose from downward spiral. And so I was really impressed because at times like this, just like we said with Clorox, it would be very tempting to go, we're Lego, everyone's staying home, playing with their kids, good luck. You need us no matter what. We're going to do whatever we damn well please. But they didn't. Despite that number one position, knowing that every parent needs Lego more than ever now, they did the right thing in a lot of ways. They kept a steady growth. What we also learned from talking to some people at Lego is that they figured out the supply chain. They knew that there'd be shortages when there was all this crazy global tension. They had fantastic, this is all the boring stuff that no one gets credit for, but they had fantastic supply chain ABC. And to me, how do you really demonstrate innovation and growth if it's more than a flash in the pan? I think they're doing it. And I think that they deserve an award. And once again, might be a brand that doesn't get a lot of love because it's so obvious. Of course, Lego's going to be doing well in these times, but actually not. And they should get that double click of credit for the quiet thing they did, which was, okay, all small vendors get paid. And who knows how many weeks of revenue and help in the ecosystem and unemployment that curtailed by doing the right thing in the first place. So that's who I pick.
I'm wondering if part of the thread here is that they've always been really good at user-generated kind of understanding who their users were and collaborating with them very intimately. I know when I wrote my first book almost a decade ago, they were kind of the poster boy for doing good user collaboration. I'm wondering if there's some vestiges of that in the way they've now approached the pandemic and
yeah. Well, I remember we worked with them a couple of years ago in Aalborg, and it was interesting because what they did is it was a combination. I was surprised, for instance, that all these kind of Boy Scout, Girl Scout troops of, adult Lego people are really listened to, absolutely. There's this influx. You don't have to wait for a focus group to tell you what's going on. There's tons of, minute by minute contact is what we learned. And I think the other piece of this is the foundation. They really understand play. And I think it's one of the things, my prediction is that play is going to come to the forefront also, as all of us have these huge mental health issues that are under the surface right now globally. It's not going to get any better. We're in an election year in the United States. It's going to be a tense year. People are pretty insecure. And I think that really the basic human need to play is something that they really have in their bones. And the thought of them being able to double click on that, also export it, repurpose it, apply it in new ways is a core competency that the world needs.
All right, I'm going to play anchor person on this one, and then we're going to do three things afterward. I'm going to send it over to Taylor, see what we haven't covered in your extensive list of products and companies that you've identified. We're going to do a quick round the horn in terms of what we've learned, and then we'll do some housekeeping stuff at the end here. So my three, and I allow all of my panelists to boo me as I say this one. Amazon. All right. I know they're the big bad company and it's obvious or whatever, but I just looked at their quarterly growth and they're up 26% again. And, I think I marvel at the fact that I order something and it can show up like before I get back from cottage country. It's just, I don't know how they do it. I think 5 years ago, we kind of underestimate how much change happens over a long period of time versus like overestimating maybe they're short. 5 years ago, I think we were all happy with 3 to 5 day delivery. Now we almost, because of Amazon, expect same day delivery. So I give them plaudits. I know they can be the evil empire at times, but versus any type of benchmark over the last decade, they have grown by leaps and bounds. So from a growth standpoint, some begrudging respect there. I'm going to throw another retail in there, Shopify. Shopify has just this past year set up partnerships with both Walmart. So the top 1,200 Shopify retailers can now sell their products in Walmart, which I think is a win-win for both the platform and some of their users. And as well, I get worried when a nice Canadian company like Shopify partners up with an evil company from the States called Facebook. But they've, now you can instantly set up a Shopify shop with, fairly not a lot of skill sets in terms of being able to do it on either Facebook or Instagram. And so that's another extension to what their growth looks like. And then another company I identified, a little bit less well known, was Prodigy Software, Prodigy Education. Certainly, if you look at one of the most painful things of either parenting during a pandemic crisis or what teachers have to do, math and education of grade schoolers. Those two are not a really good Venn diagram with each other. And so Prodigy has built, I think, a 50 million user base of people based on just being really good at that and gamifying math education. So good on them for that, and maybe relieving parents of that responsibility. All right, we have about 7 or 8 minutes left in our webcast. Taylor, this is a vulnerable moment for us. We're giving you the conch. Just grab 2 or 3 minutes, take us through the stuff that we haven't looked at, and then we'll come back and do our round the horn.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of took this this whole award thing a little too far because I thought we were giving out our own fun awards. So real quick, I'm just going to run through some of the fun awards that I didn't really get a chance to shoehorn in. So management consulting framework, one of my favorites comes from Rich Lesser. Rich Lesser basically is this really interesting visionary guy that's the president of BCG, and he has this really interesting metaphorical breakdown, not only to what needs to happen over the next 10 years, so that by 2030 we have some really massive changes, but more interestingly, I think you could explain it to a kid, the way that he kind of goes over where companies are in the ecosystem and who is escaping a swamp. They've been doing things so old school and now they're climbing the hill, or they need to cross a river. There's a big chasm in the way. I screenshotted his presentation and added in a handful of Danish companies because I use some of this actually in a lot of the events that I speak at. I've linked in here, and I can certainly send over the link to the entire presentation, but I love his stuff. I think he's absolutely brilliant. The next one is the kind of leader that collaborates with startups and sees the value in the future of startups. It's John Chambers. He was the former Cisco CEO. He'd been there for like 30 years. He's rolling out JC2 Ventures. This guy's all about supporting startups and understands it to a T. My favorite quote from this guy is 40% of Fortune 500 companies that don't partner with startups will become irrelevant in 10 years. Super fascinating guy, and I would say this is the mover and shaker to follow for the next decade to see what he actually throws his money at, because this might as well be the Warren Buffett of startups. In terms of the radical outsider effect, I talked about this new CEO from Nokia, but we're going to move on because I already kind of hit that. A couple of viral hacks that were COVID related that I really, really liked, and these are local plays. One of them is basically a guy that runs this huge pizza company called Gorm's Pizza. Put out a big thing on Twitter and Facebook that, hey, I got a ton of ingredients that are going to go bad. Come on by and pick up as much as you can carry. It created traffic jams. Not a lot of social distancing going on here, but really fascinating play. He got tons of press, free press, out of what normally would have been a trip to the landfill. And then, of course, there's a ton of microbreweries that have been doing the same thing. You know, you got to bring your own bucket, but you can take home as much free beer as you want, which I think is a really cool move. And I'm surprised you don't hear more about this. Last couple of ones, I just feel like it's so important to give out a good guy award or somebody that's doing the right thing. And I'd like to talk about Avi Schiffman for just a minute. This is a high school kid, 17 years old, turns down $8 million for his viral app just to put ads on it. And he says, no, I don't want to slow down the app. I don't want to take people away. I want to give people information that's relevant about COVID-19. And that's incredibly powerful. The last little thing that I think most awards are like rigged. So it was like creating a growth engine, my company. So,
oh, you didn't go there.
Of course I did. But yeah, I like keeping these things playful and fun. And I really appreciate you guys having me on, but I think it's always cool to give off those little, I don't know, those little small awards that maybe aren't worth anything other than just a little recognition of doing the right things.
All right. Some good shameless self-promotion there. I'm used to Americans doing this. I'm not used to this European sentiment of shameless self-promotion, but that was a good list. I thank you. Maybe just quickly, Bob, going around the horn, I'll start. I guess what I've learned from this is certainly you've identified a number of different examples, and I think if you tease out some of our examples, there's a why behind why we put these people on the list that is kind of interesting. That was kind of what I learned today. We came up with some pretty powerful whys. What did you learn today, Bob?
Yeah, I would agree. And I would also say because there wasn't a lot of structure to the criteria, we all applied different whys. And so it made for an even richer experience. We all have different backgrounds and perspectives, but because the criteria weren't formalized, I think we came up with different rationales, all of which were, I think, well thought through from what I could tell, but came at it from a little bit different angle. So we ended up with no overlap. I don't think anybody claimed the same brand, which when you have 4 people in, this many categories, kind of amazing. We didn't at least once end up with an overlap or having chosen the same company. So good job. Appreciate the ability to participate in this event. Thank you.
Bob, I'm surprised you didn't pick Clint Marketing as well. Just I'm surprised that overlap didn't happen.
Yeah, there's that.
Hey, it's never too late to change your answers, though.
Yes, that's true.
Andrea, what did we learn?
My last thing is I think swim lanes are dead. I really was struck by that. Things we were not just joking about Nokia again, really, but the fact that people are jumping category, it's like jumping the shark. They're just like, whoa, we thought you were this kind of company and now you're doing this thing. And to me, what's interesting is, COVID might have been the forcing factor here, right? Like the forcing factor might be, oh my gosh, we have to make airplanes safe again. But I think that as Taylor said, there was pent up need to do some of this anyway. And it's amazing because it's kind of separating the people who do it because they know it's the right thing to do and people who think that they don't need to. So I think swim lanes are dead.
All right, we're in the last couple of minutes. Taylor, what's your 15 seconds on what you learned?
I actually really like the example of Lego that Andrea had mentioned, because it's one of the core areas that I really focus on in the marketing funnel, which is often an afterthought, the delight stage, where you could do a really small gesture for somebody, but they'll remember it for the rest of their lives. And Lego didn't need to pay their vendors first, but it obviously makes them feel more warm and fuzzy about doing business with that brand in the future. If they ever hit, murky waters or trouble ahead, I think people remember them as the brand that thought of them first, especially as vendors are now wondering, oh my God, how am I going to pay the bills, this and that. I think that was a really strong gesture that really didn't cost them anything. And I think ultimately that'll serve them in the future. And I'll definitely probably use that example. It's a great example. So that alone, and of course, I also agree with Bob that it's so interesting from the different perspectives what people choose to kind of volunteer up. It's really interesting to me. So I really appreciate the chance to kind of, yeah, be a part of this.
Well, I really want to thank the panelists. I've got like 3 or 4 housekeeping announcements here, but you guys really brought your A game. I think we've done similar types of things before, and it's like some of the expecteds might have been on the list. You guys definitely invested the time, so I'm thankful. I'm sure our audiences will be thankful, and my hope is we can grab both of you to be judges on our awards as we're ready to reveal the finalists. So just in our ongoing pursuit of the future, I thought I'd make a couple of different announcements. Certainly our next webcast, we're, Andrea, maybe it's relief for us. We're taking an extra week for ourselves and going July 14th. It's summertime. So we're going to do something on the future of work and the importance of culture and leadership, which we've certainly seen over the last little while. So that's July 14th. We've got a newsletter where we package all of this stuff and send it out to thousands of people. We think it's pretty smart. Hopefully you can join it at futureproofingnext.com. We've created this great guild. I love the idea of gray swans, and I love the idea of medieval guilds. We've put this together as a concept and created a guild of about 200 people around the world that got together and made sense of the pandemic. You can go to grayswanguild.org and see what we've produced as our first document and some of the other activities that are going on there. Myself and Andrea are producing a book next month, so yay. It's like hatching a baby. And so we look forward to sharing that with people as the summer reading progresses. And that's about it. So I think, Andrea, unless you have anything else to add, we'll end it here. But I want to thank our guests, Bob and Taylor. And with no further ado, we will see you in the future. Thank you, everybody.